Many of you may know, but international migration alongside climate change, global economic inequality, and political strife and war and pandemics was designated by the United Nations as the issues of global concerns. So we're talking about a very critical issue, but also as recent events, 3 recent events have shown, it is an issue that is not going away any soon. These events are the Syrian refugee crisis that started in 2015, and with a high intensity that somehow has decreased in intensity but still running, and also the Brexit, the British vote to exit from the European Union, which is in one way linked to international migration. And the most recent issue that made the global headlines was the President Donald Trump executive order rescinding immigration access to the US territory for citizens of a certain number of countries, and also ordering the building of a wall between Mexico and the United States. These 3 issues have been the object of my research. So I've written actually a series of articles on the first, the Syrian refugee crisis, that was published in journal Governance, and that I want to compound into a book-length publication. I've also written a working paper on the Brexit in relation to immigration as well. And I'm planning actually to write another research paper on the executive order. I find it a really exciting issue. But also I would say that I have experience in one way or another dealing with those issues. When the Syrian refugee crisis started, I was coincidentally in Budapest. I was traveling from Poland to Slovakia to Budapest to catch my flight to Moscow. And so that evening I just I was arrived downtown. I was trying to get into the metro, and then I saw all these people who look really despondent, literally littering the suburb, the metro, and I was really gobsmacked by this image. I thought that was not the idea, that the image that I had of Hungary. So I was thinking, well, it's quite a... But what I didn't know, because I hadn't followed the news for many days, was that they were refugees, right? And that they were refugees, and they were looking really weak, emaciated, and at the entrance of the metro station, there were police standing guard. And I remember I was dragging my luggages there were some Filipino tourists as well, and I was kind of running scared for for my belongings. But I felt really shocked when I actually realized that they were refugees coming from Syria. So that was not even close to the railway station where the bulk of refugees were at that time, at the Koleti railway station in Budapest. So that was the image of what was happening at that time. I have always, because of my research on Scandinavia, traveled quite frequently between Scandinavia and Moscow, working with the Malmö Institute of Migration for the studies of migration, diversity and welfare. So not long ago, in January 2016, I also had this experience when I arrived at Malmo at Kastrup Airport, Copenhagen Airport, and I was kind of, I would say, disturbed by the control because I mean I've been traveling between two cities for many years, and then suddenly we had everybody had to show a piece of ID before going through, and so this is what the border between Denmark and Sweden looked like. It was quite, I would say, civilized in a way, but still, it was just a wake-up call to the new reality that we were living. The third experience in relation to Brexit goes back far to actually more than 10 years ago when I was living in Britain. So in 2005, I was living in this small town, Exmouth in England. For those who know, it is a bit outside Exeter in the southwest. So I lived there for almost a year. And during that time, we witnessed the first wave of intra-EU migrants, meaning Eastern Europeans from the 10 accession countries, Slovakia, Poland, the Czech Republic, the Baltic country, as they were given access to move and settle anyway within the European Union. So this is our small town, a very, very quaint town, situated in what is called the English Riviera, because it's one of the warmest part of England, but the majority of the population is actually made of pensioners. And so we kind of experience very much the clash between suddenly this wave of very young, young people coming into this town of pensioners, and that was in 2005. So now I can look back and understand, I think, many things of after the Brexit and all the debate that occurs around. The third experience that I had is in connection with the United States, and I had the opportunity, that was last year in April, to visit Southern California, to be a visiting scholar at the University of California in San Diego, which is a city which is just opposite Tijuana, which is the Mexican city, and which is one of the main port of entries into the United States. And so I had the opportunity of going and actually looking at what the border or the frontier post look like. And so we drive towards Mexico until we got to the point where we had to return. But also we kind of went around and actually went towards the wall, because it may seem like there is no wall yet, but in fact there is one, and one that is patrol. So if you look closely at the image, you see a sort of pickup truck, and you see also the projectors over there. They are belong to the Custom and Borders Protection, and they are patrol almost 24 hours. So it was quite a nice, quite a striking experience actually to leave those things. And but also I had the opportunity of actually meeting people, and I was quite lucky to have as host family a Mexican-American family. So Adelina on the left and Rosa on the right, who kind of, let me in their house. So I had the opportunity to have a direct contact with the population and also with people living in the border. And their story, I would say, was quite interesting, because these were people who became American citizens This is where people had houses, homes. In Tijuana, I was going through the borders, and from the insights that I got, I think that they are quite far from what you will hear in the media. So I was very, very enlightened in that sense. Well, this talk will be divided into, I would say, 4 parts. The first part will deal with the context. I will try very quickly to go through some of the context, definition, concepts that we use to describe many factors, phenomena in relation to international migration, so as to help you to understand some of the reference points that I am going to use, and perhaps even better understand political events and political development. And then the second part will be used to, in a way, to understand what are the tenets, what are the causes, what are the factors of that led to these 3 developments that we have witnessed. That is the Syrian refugee crisis that spilled over Europe, and the Brexit, and the executive order. And in the third part, I will deal with possible consequences. What can we expect in the short term, perhaps in the middle term, and why not in the long term? So what is tomorrow is going to be made of? And to conclude, I will suggest a number of solutions of mine that come out of my research. So to start with, when we talk about migration, we usually refer to two concepts. The first is immigration, that is crossing the border from a country, from the exterior, the action of going into a country, and usually all the development surrounding that action is referred to as the politics of controls. So all the politics that surround immigration crossing borders. And usually there are what we call short-term. If you go into a country and you stay for 6 months or less than 6 months, you are usually considered as a visitor, so your stay is temporary. But if you're going to stay for more than 6 years, you are considered as somebody who is going to settle, right? Then most of the time you are considered as an immigrant. For some countries, the cutoff point is 1 year. That is when they think that, okay, we are going to look into perhaps what kind of rights you're going to have, and so on and so forth. You are considered really as somebody who is going to settle in the country. Of course, this seems to be a bit theoretical, but, and perhaps it doesn't matter so much for people, because you see people coming, arriving, and perhaps with the intention of staying in the country for a long term, whereas for authorities, they're not seeing that like that. Anyway, this is the formality. And we have also a type of immigration that is linked to refugees. And a refugee, in fact, is someone who has been awarded the status of refugee, right? In the media, we always, the discourse is quite fuzzy, but a refugee is actually somebody who is seeking asylum and who has been formally recognized as such. And usually by the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. And those people, those who have been recognized officially are called quota refugees, because it is orderly immigration. And usually it's based on the 1951 Geneva Convention that was adopted right after the Second World War. and that aim at preventing the recurrence of what had happened during the First World War, because there was a chaotic situation, especially in relation to minorities and Jews. And the 1951 Geneva Convention was drafted in order to prevent that kind of situation in the future, just as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948 was drafted to help prevent war, prevent future generations for the scourge of war. And in that convention, the status of refugees was defined as being applicable to anybody who is fleeing his country because of persecution of the basis of political opinion, creed, religious creed, ethnicity, ideas, and that cannot actually afford the protection of the state to which he or her belongs. And so in 1967, I have to say that the convention was initially applied to Jewish refugees, but in 1967 it was expanded to everyone in the world. So it was quite a milestone. And so the United Nations, in convention with a certain number of countries around the world, some 130 that are signatories to the convention, have in one way decided to abide by those principles. And not only to give the absolute right to people fleeing that sort of persecution to apply for refugee status is an absolute right. So all the countries that are signatory to the convention cannot deny to anyone the possibility of applying. But now there's a difference between applying and obtaining, but at least applying. And again, in the case of quota refugee, for which the process is very well organized, usually it's the United Nations, the UNHCR that take care of the process. So identify those people, screen them, do interviews and do health checks and usually security background, and then determine that those people are, deemed, refugees, and then usually inform the states about these people, and those refugees do not have the possibility of choosing the country to which they go. So it's the UNHCR that decide almost randomly. And then each country has a quota. For instance, New Zealand has a 700, but that is since 1980s. So human rights associations are battling, fighting for the governments to increase. Sweden will have something like 3,000. The United States, you heard about 100,000 being receded to 50,000. So this is all official. But then now you have a different class that are called de facto refugee. These are people who just roll over to the border, do not go through this very orderly process through the United Nations. And they are mostly in the news when you hear about people crossing the Mediterranean. These are people who are going to apply for asylum that are, in fact, what we call de facto refugees. They just roll over. And the caveat and the reality is that for somebody to be recognized formally as a quota refugee, the average period of time is 17 years. So those people who are, recognized as refugees. Usually they spend a decade in refugee camps. Another class of immigrants is concerned family reunification. These are people who are settled in a country and usually are given the possibility of reuniting with either their ascendants, that are their parents, or their descendants. And usually these are children that are less than 21 years old. Over 21 years are usually considered to be mature. But there is also a third category that are economic migrants that are quite consistent, but not always in the media, not as much as refugees. But these are people who are skilled or in-skill migrants. These are people who hold third cycle graduate degrees, and also unskilled migrants, who are people who are who do menial jobs, sometimes like cleaning, working in factories, and so on and so forth. And there is a need for both skilled and unskilled migrants. And I will perhaps focus a little bit on that because they are so prominent. But the discourse about unskilled migrants is that they tend to get into competition with native workers in some areas. So they tend to displace them, or they put pressure on wages. But what we also know is that unskilled migrants occupy niches so that they do jobs that natives would not do. For instance, cleaning, and then we can see much of that, and perhaps hard, strenuous jobs that natives will not do in developed countries. So they tend to, and who are in need, in fact. So they are much wanted after for those jobs. And then we have international students. We have people who go to some other countries for medical care. We have tourists. We have sport persons who go to attend competitions. We have artists. We have rare talents, people who are gifted, who are really in demand, have unique skills. We have business investors. I mean, people who can invest usually in almost every European country, EU country, even the United States, and many countries in the Caribbean have these kind of special programs for investors. So you are giving citizenship if you can invest 500,000 euros, for instance, in Cyprus or in Malta, and governments in fact compete to attract those people. If you can invest in real estate, if you can keep your money for a couple of years, or if you can, start a business that employs more than 10 persons, and you are giving citizenship almost on the spot. So besides, we have IDPs, internally displaced people, who are actually the most important class of, if you want, refugees. Because most people, when they flee political strife, they do not always have the possibility of going to Europe or to the United States. They do not have sometimes the physical resources of actually, and the financial resources for that matter, to do the long journey. So they try to move from one part of the country to another. So if you take the case of Syria, for instance, out of a population of 20 million, you have almost 5 million refugees, but another 10 or 9 million people are either in some other part of the country. So, and this is the case in many other countries in conflict. And then finally, we have what we call stateless people, that are people who, because of complications of different types end up, in the limbo where they are neither recognized by the country of origin and they cannot, have citizenship of or the country where they find themselves at that time. Usually it is a long story. Perhaps the person was persecuted in Iran, for instance, and then fled Iran. Then there was a change of regime in Iran. You couldn't get documents from Iran to prove his nationality, and that took many, many years. And so he vanished from any kind of record, and he find himself, for instance, in Sweden. And this is where the United Nations come in. These are people, stateless people, and then they are giving some kind of stateless document, a kind of laissez-passer from the United Nations that they can use to avail all kind of services, traveling, and also applying for permanent residence, and so on and so forth in their country of residence. I will quickly go through concepts relating to integration that are the processes that immigrants undergo once they're in the country. So once they come into a country, there are three kinds of processes that they undergo. There are socio-economic processes that what kind of rights they are going to be able to afford. Are they going to have a work permit that allows them to work? Are they going to have access to social welfare, subsidized welfare, or not? And political processes are related to citizenship participation. I mean, after how many years can they become permanent resident in the country? After how many years can they become part of the register? After how many years can they become a citizen? Also, can they vote in local elections? Can they vote in regional elections or not? And also the kind of system of reception that the state is going to put in place. I mean, most Anglo-Saxon countries, they kind of delegate it to charities, private associations that take care of the integration of immigrants. In some other countries like Sweden, it's the state itself which is in the driving seat. In some other countries, it's a mixed system. And then we have cultural processes. Are immigrants going to be encouraged to keep their culture? Like in Sweden, they say, oh, well, their cultural practices and beliefs are enriching for the national culture, or are they going to be encouraged to relinquish their culture because, the state want them to become as Danish or as French as possible. Then some other concepts that are relevant but not always heard of are repatriation. For instance, this is a whole different kind of process when somebody has been denied the right of the status of refugees, for instance, then start a process of deportation. And sometimes governments more and more give incentives in forms of money for those who have been rejected to perhaps go back to their country or force them, that is forced deportation. And we have another phenomenon that is becoming quite important, is that of circular migration. It's mostly, we saw that with refugees after World War II, where we have, for instance, Jewish refugees going, first of all, from, let's say, Poland to Denmark, and from Denmark to Canada or to the United States. It was quite common, but we are witnessing that today with international students. People will go and do a bachelor in one country, and then a master in another country, and a PhD in another one. And so we have also expats, people who are chasing jobs, relocating according to the demands of their companies. And finally, there is the all-important concept of securitization, which is related to the rise of terrorism, especially after 9/11, where because of the fact that many of the perpetrators of 9/11 were immigrants, so immigration come into a focus and become to be seen on the angle of national security. First of all, as if you want, as a lens for dealing with immigration issues. And to finish, a crisis is a chain of events occurring in a very, very fast way, uncontrolled manner for which there is no lack of solution. For instance, this is what really happened with the Syrian refugee crisis when, overnight they started to come in mass, and then the European Union and European countries did not know, in fact, how to handle that. And this is a very special condition, quite different from ordinary circumstances. So what are the causes of a determinant of the Syrian refugee crisis and that spilled over Europe in August 2015? Well, the first thing I would like to say is that it was not actually unique, because there are parallel crises in the world. I mean, there is the Congo crisis, the crisis in South Sudan, and the Rohingya in Myanmar, but we have to admit that it was quite unique in the scope of the crisis, having about this amount of people, pouring into Europe, sometimes working, and so it was something that has not been seen in Europe, at least since the Second World War. But I want to make a caveat, is that it's not, in fact, the most dramatic aspect of, the crisis in international migration, because if you really want to look closely, countries like Turkey, Jordan, Lebanon have shouldered a higher burden than most European countries. Of course, you can talk about Sweden and Germany, but usually the countries that have actually shouldered the largest sizes of refugees are countries like Kenya, which has received Somali refugees for over 20 years. I mean, the largest refugee camp, actually, the one in Dadaab, is found in Kenya, and the Kenyan government was threatening to close it. But we have countries like Pakistan, which has received Afghan refugees in millions over many years. But the crisis that we had in Europe, as I argue in one of my articles, was alimented, first of all, by a lack of resources. Because the countries in the frontline states, Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, but also Greece, did not receive the help in terms of resources that they needed when the crisis started. The crisis started in 2011, but at that time, we could say that Syrian refugees were self-sufficient, because usually the story is that of people who had savings. And so the first thing that they do is that when there is a crisis, political crisis like that, they try to survive, they use their savings, and after that, they run out of the savings, and so they start borrowing from people, and after that they cannot reimburse because they do not have any jobs, and their situation worsens. And usually the host countries, as generous as they cannot, because they themselves are lacking resources. I mean, countries like Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan are developing countries. So they do not have the resources to allocate enough resources to allocate to their own citizens, let's to allocate them to these new citizens. So in fact, usually they rely on the United Nations, but the United Nations also rely most of the time on rich countries. And so what happened is that they didn't receive enough contribution to run the projects that would have, to a certain extent, alleviated the situation, the plight of these refugees. So with time, they were forced to actually resort to drastic solutions. And so that's the reason why at some point, with no hope in a political solution, a quick political solution, they kind of realized that the children were not going to school, so they were missing out of many things, and then they started to take very drastic decisions as if possibly to work towards a journey. I mean, there is, the people have also said that it's because Chancellor Merkel gave them a signal and saying that you are welcome in Germany, but facts are showing that people actually started moving towards Germany before the Merkel's declaration. And the Frontex, which is the EU organization in charge of managing borders, was really, really astonishingly, I would say, under-equipped. First of all, it's based in Warsaw and use satellites to kind of deal with issues in Italy. And also, what we also know is that they don't have their own, they didn't have their own equipment, and that they had to, appeal to EU governments whether they wanted to contribute helicopters or ships or whatever, so that they could take any kind of action in order to rescue people in the Mediterranean, or just in order to fight human traffickers or people smugglers. But also, and that is, the rooted in the lack of collective action. And the truth is that the European Union had been the prey of diverging interest. Northern countries and like Germany and Sweden to a certain extent, but also Austria and the frontline states like Italy and Greece had been facing different issues, also behaving differently. So as per the Dublin Convention, the first country of entry is a country that has to take care of the refugees. And what we know is that Italy, most refugees are coming through the Mediterranean, or they're coming through Turkey, that is the eastern road, or the central road, or they call through Spain, that is the western route. But it means that all the burden of dealing with refugees was actually assigned to these frontline states. And so sometimes they woke up and started to wonder how come they came to sign such an agreement, because it didn't work as proposed, because they didn't receive the financial support, the material support that was needed. So they ended up with these people. On top of that, with the financial crisis, the consequences that they paid minimal service. So the first point of entry principle was not applied. And this is the reason why countries like Germany and Sweden ended up with more refugees, whereas than countries in the frontline states. Why these refugees are coming from the Mediterranean? So it's really a paradox. But that paradox can only be understood by a lack of collective actions, that nobody was really playing the game until we had the crisis and then a redistribution of cards. But also we saw that that lack of collective actions were underpinned with questions of identity that really divided very seriously Eastern European countries and Western European countries, to the point of really unraveling the European Union. The Baltic countries and the Visegrad countries who were perceiving the arrival of Syrian refugees as a threat to the territorial integrity, but also the identity of Europe as a whole, as a whole. Whereas Western European countries underscore the fact that welcoming refugees was part of the values of the European Union, that civic identity, civic, if you want, nationalism is part of European values, is a foundation of the European values. So they diverge on that. And so now we find ourselves in a kind of status quo. I'll come back to that. And then the third, which is mostly the consequences of those problems in policymaking, there was a lack of state capacity, because not being able to agree on a common policy, having 28 countries with divergent interests and also different perception of what is the policy. And finally, the institution, the pan-European institution or the European institution that could have actually played a more instrumental role, especially in this situation of crisis, the European Union, the European Commission, has been sidelined because of the nature of policymaking within the European Union, which is intergovernmental. It is dominated by governments. So we have a central executive, which is the European Commission, that is quite ineffective, in the sense that it doesn't have the means and even the mandate of taking the initiative. The second case, the Brexit, differ quite from the first case, because it was not really a situation of crisis, but it was really one that was, I would say, expected, the product of ordinary policymaking, although having a referendum was something that was quite special in a way. Only in Switzerland do we have usually this kind of policymaking through referenda. And so in that way, it was quite special itself. And the question why is that I think that the UK Prime Minister David Cameron was quite confident that he was going to win the vote, because he wouldn't have gone for a referendum if he was not so confident in the outcome of the vote. But we had the outcome that we had, and it has been said that economic marginalization was one of the main explanation for the outcome of the referendum, that there was a fault line between the haves and the haves not. But there is another reason that is quite compelling, that is that the referendum was aimed at stopping immigration, taking back control. That was one of the motto of the Brexit years. So taking back control from the European Union in order to stop intra-EU migration. The one that I referred to that started in 2015 when I was in Exmouth. And because I remember very well that I was reading about the issue right in 2015. At that time, Prime Minister Tony Blair was in power, and Britain was the only country with Sweden that actually opened its labor market to the new accession countries. And it was said that that the British economy needed manpower, that immigration was going to power economic growth. But there were people who were very much skeptical about the decision of Prime Minister Blair to open the labor market to the A10 countries. And I remember very well that the Sun, the popular spreadsheet, was very much trumpeting about things like the mass arrival of Romas and how Britain was going to be turned into things and so on and so forth. What we knew, if I can, from my opinion, is that indeed that immigration contribute to economic growth. There's no doubt about it. I could see that in Exmouth and in Exeter, how Polish workers were doing all the hard job. I've seen that actually in California as well with Mexican immigration. I'll come back to that. And that there was a need for this unskilled migration. But another caveat that was said was that that migration was going to diminish. It was going to decrease progressively over the years as Eastern EU countries themselves grow and so on and so forth, so that it was not going to be long-lasting. But numbers actually have shown that it has not succeeded, although, again, as I'm saying, there was a proven economic benefit for that immigration. And then we had in the 2007 two more countries. We have in 2011, so we had Bulgaria and Romania and then Croatia. And the Brexiteers' argument was that Britain had to take back control of that immigration that was out of control by actually getting out of the European Union. That was actually, there was quite, I would say, unanimity in the principle, because even Prime Minister David Cameron went to Brussels to ask for a certain number of changes that will allow them to control that immigration, but not get out of the European Union, because the point was that if they can implement those decisions, like reducing access to welfare for intra-EU migrants, like being able to put a hold on immigration from those countries if they feel like there is that it is getting out of control, that there are more people arriving. And also there was obviously changes in the governments of the EU. But what happened during the negotiation is that the European Union refused to concede. They refused to concede, and when Prime Minister Cameron came back, he presented what he had got from Brussels, but many people were not quite happy with that. Whereas he presented that as quite an achievement. So the result of the referendum can be explained as a rejection of the the offer of Prime Minister David Cameron from what you got from Brussels. And how can we explain this radical shift? We can also say that there was a shift in the national boundary because, well, these intra-EU migrants were European, right? So these are European, part of the European Union, but if they voted to stop this immigration, it means that the conception of identity, of British identity, is really that still excluded them, excluded Eastern Europeans. So that's the second explanation. The third explanation is the rise of English nationalism itself. I remember when I was in England, there was virtually no English nationalism if you want to look at the waving of the flags. You know, you have Scottish nationalism, you have Irish nationalism, you have St. Patrick's Day, right? You have a lot of Welsh nationalism, and I could see that in our small town of Exmouth. But at some point, we started to see people, you know, driving around with the English flag, with St. George flag. And so that was quite early in the 2015, and I can only assume that that nationalism has risen during that time. So, and the other factor I would say is what we can say, the absence of contact between rural Englanders and immigrants, because the result of the referendum showed that those who voted to get out of European Union were mostly people from rural area, and there was quite a positive correlation between the percentage of immigrants in those areas and the living vote. This is based on statistical analysis. And again, as mentioned before, the lack of bureaucratic autonomy of the Cameroon government in its negotiation with the EU, because it couldn't get as much as it wanted because the EU wouldn't trade the freedom of movement of intra-EU migrants. Now, the third case, which is the executive orders issued by President Trump on the 25th of January regarding the building of a wall between the US and Mexico, and 27th of January rescinding access to the US territory for 7 countries, is, in my view, also based on the aim of taking back control. And I think that this is quite evident in the speech that he gave when he was signing the executive order. I mean, the words were in a way the same. You say taking back control. Taking back control of the borders by stopping demographic change in the United States. I think that beyond all these actions is the fact that the United States is on the cusp of demographic change. It has become a much more diverse nation. It has always been a nation of immigrants, but for a section of the population, I mean, that some people are quite worried. And I do not know how they define it, but it seems to underpin, really, those political developments. So by building a wall to control Mexican immigration to the United States, I'll come back on, you know, different meanings and whether this is really grounded. Suspending the US Refugee Assistance Program, reviewing all types of immigration, including H-1B1 visa for skilled migrants that go to the Silicon Valley IT workers, using executive order to bypass normal, ordinary processes that are within the Congress that take more time and also more compromise. But as we know, the executive orders are currently challenged, and some part of it are suspended because of the system of checks and balances that kind of divide power, executive power between the Congress and the judiciary, the courts, and the president. So his actions could be countered, but also foreign policy. Because one question is, why is Saudi Arabia, who had 16 out of the 18 or 19 terrorists that were involved in the 9/11 attacks, more than some other countries, are not in the list? So foreign policy, I think, was one of the factors for the nature of this executive order. But this is not surprising, because there are interests, that are involved. Also, perhaps that has been very, very evident, that is the liberal embeddedness of courts. Because what the executive orders were stopped in their tracks mostly by judges. They were stopped mostly by judges that are independent, but also we know in the research that usually they are more liberal than conservative. And also another factor that should not be discounted is the strong civic society that has always existed in America, going back to the time that Alexis de Tocqueville was visiting America, that he described as a country of association. So human rights associations were poised to react to the executive orders, and it's going to be like that. And finally, I think this is perhaps the most important dimension, which is quite cut-crossing, is the centrality of anti-discrimination law, which is inscribed in the 4th and 15th amendments of the U.S. Constitution, and also the Civil Rights Act. And the judges use these provisions to make their judgments against the law. And my personal experience is that it is at the University of California, for instance, where everywhere in the kitchen there is over the sink the anti-discrimination legislation is always pasted for everyone to know. So I'm not really surprised that that the court emitted this judgment, and I believe that it's going to be a very big battle line in what comes next. Now, possible consequences is quite a laundry list. For the EU, I think that there's going to be a rise in radical parties, radical right parties to power. So there is a potential consequence. And I think that this is rooted in the fact, and that is quite evidenced by the Brexit. It's also evident by the rise to power of Donald Trump, because I believe that the electorate does not want half measures anymore. This is what I think that we had with Prime Minister Cameron coming back from Brussels and saying, this is what we're going to do. I think that it becomes more complicated for people to understand. And so what they want is really radical measures. And so I fear, really, that we are going to see more people resorting to radical solutions, because they think in some ways that we've been trying this for some times, and it's always the same, and that we're not making any, there is no real change. And we're going to see, and we have seen, I think, an uptick in demographic growth in countries like Germany and Sweden who have demographic problems. But I think a few months ago, Sweden finally hit the mark of 10 million people that it has been trying to hit at least since 2000, perhaps 5 or 6. And that was actually in part due to immigration. And sharp decline of trust in government institutions, that is what I was referring to. More deportations of economic migrants. I think that governments are going to put more resources into deporting people, and they're going to speed up the process of adjudication of whatever things about status of refugees, but they're not going to do anymore like it was in the past, where when somebody was denied asylum, that the person could still stay in the government housing, for instance. That has been cancelled in Sweden, or told to be to leave the country. I think that they're actually going to go after people, and this is quite evident in some of the measures that they took lately. But also regarding the UK, I think that there is not going to be a better solution. That by leaving the European Union, I'm quite pessimistic. I think that the main fault line is going to be visa against markets. It's not going to work. I don't think that the UK is going to be able to get some markets without access to markets from whether it is the European Union or India, without having to give in freedom of movements. I think this has been very clear from the visit that Prime Minister May made to India, which is, let's say, a new coveted market. So I think that we're coming back to the point of departure. There is, I think, going to be more intra-EU migration to Sweden and Germany, because as intra-EU migrants from Eastern Europe will be prohibited, will not go to Britain, they will now try to go to Germany and Sweden, that are two other prosperous countries. And more application for citizenship, Britons in Europe, Europeans in Britain, we have seen that already. But perhaps more mistrust between natives and foreign-borns. I mean, we've seen that in the aftermath of the Brexit. And concerning the United States, I think that there is going to be more polarization between Democrats and Republicans. There was going to be long-running battles, or there's going to be a tug of war between federal government and states, especially states like California that are very, very liberal, New York, where we have LA and New York, which have already declared themselves sanctuary cities, meaning that they're going to give protection to illegal immigrants when they are pursued by the government. So I think that pitch battle is going to be quite recurrent, and increase in application for citizenship from immigrants. I think that started actually before the elections. I remember once I was in San Diego and just walking down the street, and I think it's on Fridays where they have naturalization ceremonies, but the queue was so long that it was actually going outside and spilling over in the street. And many of those people, I could tell, were Hispanics. So there's going to be now more application for citizenship, perhaps more racial mistrust. What actually is quite mind-boggling is that since President Trump has come to power, there has not been any skirmishes between the police and minorities. So I don't know how long it's going to last, but it's going to be very interesting to see how this is going to be developed. But I also think that there's going to be more mobilization, political mobilization from Hispanics and Asian Americans, who are the most targeted by this immigration reform. But one thing that is certainly going to happen is that citizens are going to be caught up in that process, and it is always something that set back the process. We've seen that in Sweden. At some time, authorities wanted to go after illegal immigrants, so they started to do checks in metro stations, and usually because they need to identify immigrants usually by their looks, but usually many of them are actually citizens. In a society of rights, people are not really going to like it, and usually there is a pressure on the government to stop, and it doesn't always go further. So even if in operation of deportations, I think that there's going to be a lot of controversy, because many of the people who are going to be caught up are going to be citizens, US citizens, and that will backfire in a way. But foreign policy as well, I think there's going to be a lot of discontent from Latin American and Asian governments. Although this is very much established that the diaspora, always have an influence on foreign policy. So those governments are not going to be very happy that their kins, somehow, although perhaps they are legally residents or even illegally residents in the United States, are going to be treated differently. So, also I think that Canada and Sweden are going to become alternative destination to the United States. And we have seen that with Stockholm already, who is coming a new destination for startup companies. I mean, people, it is positioning itself. I mean, you have Frankfurt positioning itself for even Paris as a destination for multinational companies, as an alternative to London, for instance. To finish, prospective solutions, I think that the EU need more pragmatism in dealing with member states. So I think that if the EU had been a little less stiff with Prime Minister Cameron, perhaps they could have had a better deal. They could have accepted, they could have conceded, and perhaps Brexit would have been averted. I'm not sure, but I think that was a real possibility. And also better information and communication on EU actions, because it's quite a paradox that usually the EU is so much blamed for so many things, but it doesn't get credit for all what it does. And so we saw that in many areas that receive a huge amount of quite consistent funding from the European Union, that they actually voted to exit the European Union. And also, as I mentioned before, we need more autonomy for the EU Commission. With 28 states, we need a central institution that can take care of some of these very practical business, and also have influence, impact on policy making. But also more policy coherence, because even when we have a common policy, it's not really applied uniformly. Scandinavian countries usually apply, EU legislation, but it's not always the case in other countries. Sometimes it's even ignored. I had this experience when I was in Poland, where there's a directive or researcher, but I turned up with a Japanese researcher at the immigration, but nobody knew about that. So we're talking across cross purpose when we say that there is an EU legislation for that, and they say that no, we only have two in Poland. And then the Japanese scholar told me that no, well, I understand what you mean, but they don't. So you have to get to a more equal, um, uniformization in the implementation of policy, but more professionalization, as I was saying, but also more multilateral diplomacy. I think this is very important, looking at the Turkey EU agreement that kind of brought into control the flows in March 2016. I think that there is an example of what need to be done, not only with Turkey, but North African states, but also sub-Saharan African states. And I think that Chancellor Merkel has been doing that because she's been on tour, going to Mali, going to Niger, for instance, or going to Eastern Europe to kind of get into agreements about repatriation, admission agreements, and so on and so forth. And prospective solution about the UK, I do not really see anything else than a kind of Norwegian or Swiss-like agreement. Because when you look at the European landscape, there is no European country that is not in one way or another tied to the European Union. So it's got to be something, a kind of agreement that will be based on what we know. Perhaps a bit more, a bit lighter than the agreement of association that Switzerland and Norway have with the European Union. But I think that there's going to be one. Otherwise, Britain will really be an island within Europe. Regarding the United States, I think that this is my suggestion, that there should be a special visa for Mexicans, for a special class. I mean, you have that in New Zealand, between New Zealand and Australia, where New Zealanders can actually go and settle in Australia, and then they are afforded a certain number of things, but perhaps not that give a path to citizenship. Of course, this is going to be something totally new, because I think there is no agreement of such kind that also does not give a path to citizenship. But I think that, and if I'm saying that, is because when we're talking about Mexican immigration today, I mean, actually, it has peaked already. So it was really in the 1990s that all the Mexican immigration, Mexican immigrants arrived in the United States. I mean, there are data about that. So very few Mexicans are going to the United States. I mean, it has become a more prosperous country as well. Usually what they do is that they go forth and back, and with the delocalization, moving of many US companies to Mexico, somehow, people do not have the reason to move permanently to the United States. But if there is a kind of facilitation, I think that people will be quite glad to take to enjoy, to exploit these economic opportunities, especially because there are people who are very proud of their culture, as well as the Mexican-American family that I live with. I mean, the lady, Rosa, had a house in Tijuana, and she was shuttling almost every 2 weeks. She had a business in Tijuana. I think that there is more than the wall. Perhaps the wall can work because now there is technology and so on and so forth, with sensors and It's going to be costly, but but it's only a first solution. It's only a first solution, especially because smugglers can get very creative. I mean, they can dig tunnel. That's what I read in the newspaper. They dug one tunnel from Tijuana all the way to San Diego, and that was in the center of San Diego, in the courtyard of a factory, where they could smuggle drug. So how do you do that? I mean, the Chapo Guzman, the cartel, chief. I mean, he was ferried out of prison, in very, very tight security conditions. And this is actually what my Mexican American host family told me. They just told me that there's no way the world is going to prevent people. Things are going in and out every day. So I think it's only a first solution. There has got to be a grand bargain. And finally, I think that the Democratic Party, which is actually working to become again the party of the working class, also need a new position on immigration, because they have been quite fuzzy about that, because perhaps they didn't want to lose a certain advantage with minorities, because they had a more favorable position. But I think that perhaps they will have to rework the policy on that. But anyway, I think that bipartisanship, like it has been before with the McCain-Kill bill that was both, formulated by Democrats and Republicans, is a working solution. Because when you look at the bill itself, it's not very different from the executive orders. I mean, it's really, really constraining, because one of the elements of the bill is saying that illegal immigrants will have to come out of the shadow, and then they will be given a legal status. But when they will apply for green card, they will have to go back to the country, and then they will have to pay back a fine, pay back taxes, and queue. So it is a very, very restrictive policy, immigration policy, that was passed in 2001 by Senator John McCain and Kill. It is so constraining that I doubt about its attractiveness for illegal immigrants, because if you have to come out of the shadow at the point when you want to become permanent resident, you have to go back to your country and queue, come after everyone that has been waiting. And we know that it takes years. Sometimes the backlog is sometimes 10, 11 years for family reunification and so on and so forth. Finally, I think that it will be to the advantage of everyone to tone down the rhetoric that we are hearing today, because when you look at the different policies, there is actually no difference. There is no real difference between the Obama policies regarding immigration and the Trump policies. I mean, actually, people are saying that President Obama has deported more people than the Bush presidents, and the Bush presidency deported more people than the Clinton. So in fact, I don't know for which purpose that rhetoric served, but in reality, I think that in essence, the policies are the same. Thank you.